good morning. This is Kelsey from Kels Reads Things at Anna Porter Public Library in Gatlinburg, Tennessee. And today I am excited to be reviewing with you once again two books. So last week I very lightly touched on the Get a Life Chloe Brown, and I never even mentioned the author's name. Her name is Talia Hibbert, and I wanted to do just a second video about this because I feel like there were quite a few details that I left out, and even though I didn't particularly like the book, that doesn't mean that my audience or other patrons of Anna Porter Library won't like it. Because of that, I'm going to just lightly touch on this again, and then I will finally get into the main event, A Heart So Fierce and Broken, the second book in the A Curse So Dark and Lonely series by Bridget Kammerer. Let's get started on these exciting books. Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Chloe Brown is an African-American plus-size woman who lives in England, and unfortunately Chloe is suffering with a chronic illness that also deals with chronic pain. She has a lot of chronic pain, and I won't tell you exactly what her diagnosis is because I personally feel like that's a little bit of a spoiler. To avoid that, I'm just going to again touch on the basic plot. So Chloe isn't constantly in pain, but luckily she works for herself in an apartment as a freelance web consultant, designer, basically anything tech-wise that you need. She's very skilled in encoding and all things HTML. After a near-death experience, Chloe realizes how much her chronic illness has gotten in the way of her living her life. In fact, as soon as she was diagnosed and she couldn't go out more, she couldn't be around her friends as often, her life just kind of fell apart, including an engagement that was ended between her and her fiancé. However, getting a life can be more complicated when her super annoying, kind, considerate, and reliable superintendent of her apartment, Red, gets in her way. He couldn't be more her opposite, and the contempt for her from him definitely shows. After a strange circumstance that involves a cat stuck in a tree, Chloe and Red agree to work together in order for Red to have his new artwork showcased in a website. He also agrees to help Chloe get a life. So that's the general plot point. Now I'm going to just go ahead and mention that the author is really thoughtful of her readers. She included a trigger warning or trigger warnings in the book about just things that the readers might want to be aware of. It's under the author's note, and it mentions that this story touches on the process of healing after an abusive relationship. And I won't say who experienced the abuse because, again, I feel like that's just giving away too much information. And they ask if you're sensitive to this topic to please be aware of it. So thank you to the author for being so considerate to bring that about and to mention that to readers before they dive into this otherwise very cute book. And that's another thing. That's something that I liked about this book. The general plot point, the story, the characters, they were all cute. It was just the progression of the relationship, the language that was used, and some other things about it that just didn't flow well with me, and that's why I didn't finish it. I got about halfway through and decided that it just wasn't a book for me. So let me talk about the things that I liked. I generally liked that Chloe was kind of her own person. She was, I liked being in her head. I liked reading things from her perspective because she's a very intense character. She's kind of rude, she's very introverted, and that's not to say that all people who are introverted are rude. It's like a coping mechanism for her, and it's easier for her to keep people at a distance, at a bay, than it is to get hurt, not only physically, but also emotionally again, by feeling abandoned once again. Red was a great character too. I enjoyed his perspective. However, I wasn't very interested in some of his early morning activities, if you catch my drift. That was one thing that turned me off from the story. The scene about the cat was the best thing about the book. The highlight, at least as far as I got, was just these two complete polar opposites rescuing a cat together. That was very entertaining for me. Basically all scenes with the cat. The cat was the best character. He was my favorite character. In fact, he even is featured right there on the book, so Yay for the cat. I also should say they're in London. I don't know if I've mentioned that. And Chloe is the oldest of two older sisters. There are two books that follow this. I think the next one is Grow Up Danny Brown or something of that nature, but there's two other books that follow the other sisters, and those sisters include Danny and Eve, and they both have really big personalities, and they were fun because they were definitely teasing Chloe about her and Red's lack of a relationship at first, or at least the stance in which it was in, and I think that they could tell that it was going to be something more between them very quickly. And I've already discussed the things that I didn't necessarily like about the book, including the progression of the relationships with the characters, some of the language that was used, and just overall, I love romance, but I just felt like this one was sped up a little too quickly. So that is my more involved review of Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I will say the writing style was more modern, so if you're interested in reading books that are more modern, this is definitely a good pick for you. There was a lot of great imagery in the book, especially when describing Chloe's episodes and experiences. She has episodes with her illness where she kind of just completely shuts down, and it was interesting to read about. I also loved all the diversity that was present, and I really liked that you had a character who was overcoming an abusive relationship. It wasn't it wasn't stereotypical, I'll put it that way. It wasn't the status quo. It wasn't something you normally find in a romance book. So that was something that I liked about it, and just because of the things I liked, I might eventually finish it. I might decide to look past the things that really bothered me and just try and finish it, because again, I really liked the characters. I just didn't like how they related to each other. I didn't like the language used, and a lot of the profanity was just jarring to the story. Okay, so that's my overall completed review of Get a Life, Chloe Brown, and now I'm very excited to finally be discussing with you A Heart So Fierce and Broken. Now, this was a 5-star read. I absolutely loved this installation, which is nice because the first one I kind of felt kind of meh about. However, I listened to the audiobook for the first one, and I guess I wasn't a huge fan of the narrator, and I think that was kind of what contributed to my overall feeling of the book, and it wasn't necessarily fair. So I might go back and reread it at some point, but for the time being, I'm reading the third book, and I'm loving it as well. But for now, we're going to discuss A Heart So Fierce and Broken. So, when the story finished in A Curse So Dark and Lonely, or at least where it left off, Ren is still in Emberfall. The curse has been broken. Yay, curse broken. Harper is still there with him, as is her brother Jake and his partner Noah, who is a healer. And Jake has a little bit of a dark past. He kind of acted as, the head of house once their father left, and unfortunately their father was involved in a lot of street crime. And therefore, Harper and her brother were involved in a lot of street crime because of that. Gray, the last time we saw him, he was back in D.C., Washington, D.C., where he picked up Harper, and he has killed Lilith. So yay! That was the last place that we left off. But now, with A Heart So Fierce and Broken, it mostly follows Gray's perspective as well as a new character. Her name is Leah Mara, and she is the firstborn daughter of Karis Lurin, who is basically the head honcho, the monarch, the queen. I think it's Sila Shallow. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, but if I'm not, please forgive me, Bridget Kammerer. I sincerely apologize. And they are the enemies. They were who they were fighting, because not only was Gray, grappling with this curse and trying to reconnect with his people, because they haven't been connected to the monarch in 300 years or something. This curse has been ongoing, and Gray has never really been able to leave his castle. So slowly but surely, the kingdom of Emberfall has been falling into poverty, and they don't really trust Ren, and it's just really complicated and convoluted. And Lilith made it known that there was another heir. That Ren might not actually be the rightful heir of Emberfall, and Gray happens to be the man that knows the truth. And because of that, Gray goes into hiding. We learn by the end of book 2, now this is a major spoiler, so if you have not finished book 1, maybe go ahead and read that before you watch this video, but I'm going to go ahead and just give away a spoiler that most people know once they start book 2, that Gray is actually the rightful heir. He is the firstborn son of the previous king of Emberfall, and he has been Ren's head guard now for 300 years. And there's been a little bit of tension built between them in the course of that 300 years, but there's also been friendship. And now there's more tension and hatred and misunderstanding than ever, because Gray runs away from, I don't want to say his responsibilities, however, he thinks it would be easier to just leave, because he has magic in his blood. He is a mage smith. He's the rightful heir of Emberfall, and Ren hates all things magic. He's banned all magic because he is suffering through PTSD from his experiences with magic from Lilith. I know that's a lot to unfold, and I apologize for that, but that's the general plot point. Gray is in hiding at this point. He is working as a, I believe he's working as a horseman, stable boy, something of that nature, and he befriends a young man named Tycho, who is, I believe he's blonde, small for his age, and he eventually relies on Gray and vice versa. So it was nice to see another new character introduced. And at this point, of course, Ren is trying to find Gray because he knows that Gray knows who the rightful heir is. And he knows that Gray is somewhere within their world, somewhere hiding. And just absolute chaos occurs from there. And Liamara, she is a woman of peace. She is a main character. In fact, the storyline follows her and Gray, because these two eventually meet. They eventually work together to enter Silas Shallow in order to come up with a plan to more or less defeat Ren. And it's a lot very complicated. Liamara is the firstborn, however, she has not been selected to be the heir. Her younger sister, Nola Varen, was selected by their mother, Karis Lurin, to be the heir because she is known very well for her brutality, her viciousness in combat, and she is not hesitant to bring violence upon people in order to have them follow her. Liamara is a much more gentle person. She's compassionate and strong in ways that she doesn't even realize, and personally I think she would have been a more ideal candidate. And she is right now kind of grappling with that. The fact that her younger sister was selected to be the heir, and basically just trying to win the trust of Gray, trying to win the trust, and her trying to win his trust, and there's just a lot of tension in this book between all characters. Okay, so now I'm gonna talk about a few of my thoughts and things that I really liked about this installment. I definitely enjoyed this installment more than the previous, and I think it was because I wasn't as big of a supporter of Ren. Yes, he's going through a lot of PTSD, yes, he's been tortured for years by Lilith, who is the sorcerer, and yes, he has a hesitance towards magic, but I kind of saw some of the concerning warning signs about where his character was going in book 1, and that's all I'm really going to say, because there's just so much involved with each character and why they react the way they do, and how they've been conditioned over the last 300 years, and thus leading to their reflexes. But again, it was really interesting to read things from Gray as well as Liamara's perspectives, because they're very different from Harper and Ren, while also having a lot of similarities, but it's kind of like two sides of the same coin. But I personally just enjoyed Gray more as a character, even from book 1, and I loved Liamara instantly. She was just definitely a character I root for. I'm all for strong women in my female leads, but strong women that are also compassionate and kind truly own my heart. Gray reminds me of Kale from Throne of Glass, the series by Sarah J. Maas. He also really reminds me of Harry Potter, kind of a suffer in silence type, and very strong, but also exceedingly gentle when necessary. I love that about Gray's character. Liamara, she is brilliant, very clever, and incredibly resourceful. she's always finds a way out of crazy situations that she falls into that aren't even always necessarily her fault. She does make a choice that I consider a little bit reckless in this book, but she had a good reason, so I can't exactly fault her for it. I love that when she first meets Harper, she really thinks that they could be friends because they have a lot of similarities, a lot of similar compassions, and I really am looking forward to maybe seeing a friendship blossom in book 3. Poor Harper is caught in the middle in this book between her duties to Ren and the duties between Gray because she became friends with both of these men in book 1, and also her brother and Noah end up following Gray at some point in this book to Sila Shallow. She is kind of left behind, and she's dealing with a lot of, we don't really see what she's dealing with, but just know that she's dealing with a lot of mixed feelings and concerns because she's quite literally caught in the middle between two rivalries that she cares very much about. Now I'm gonna talk about Ren a little bit. Ren was a lot. He has experienced quite a bit of trauma. He is currently going through PTSD, and because of that, he makes some decisions that are very questionable and, just to be honest, cruel. Not even borderline cruel, just straight up cruel. Because of that, you got to see the rawness of each character in this book and really immerse yourself in their thoughts and their perspectives, and because of that, it just made me love it so much. Readers should be aware there is a little bit of romance in these books, obviously, because they started off as a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Readers should also know that any romantic scenes fade to black, which means usually once the characters are about to become romantically involved, immediately the chapter ends or the scene changes and it is the next morning or the next day. So there's nothing explicit whatsoever or necessarily, I think, adult at all. It is a young adult book, but there definitely the romance is not advanced whatsoever. However, the vocabulary was. I loved seeing lots of very advanced vocabulary words, so I think it would be a good book for young adults to read and just learn a few vocabulary words, if nothing else. My favorite part of this entire book was just the struggles that every character is dealing with, because they're all just trying to determine who to trust, if they can even trust themselves, and whether or not a war is even worth it, because not only is Silas Shallow, they are struggling because they're running out of resources, as is Emberfall, and according to the monarchs, the rulers, the only way to resolve this is to obviously go into war. Because how else do you resolve any issues between countries other than going into war? And I love seeing the characters really grapple with that, because there's quite a bit of hesitation, obviously. Gray doesn't want to feel like he's betraying Ren any further, but he also feels like it's his duty to take up his birthright. And he does have magic in his system, and a lot of people in this series are really hesitant towards magic because it's been nothing. A lot of it's been nothing but trouble for them for the last 300 years, so I can understand people's hesitance, but mostly this book, it's kind of like the stirring of the pot. This is just dives into the growing tensions between these characters who have always relied on each other, and it doesn't go much into detail about a war starting just yet. Just know that this is a building story. Lots and lots of building towards that potential. I loved the fact that you really got to see, and there was a highlighting of the fact that fear can lead to violence, that fear can lead to making decisions you never thought you would be capable of making. It was very important, I think, to highlight those issues, because unfortunately fear can be a downfall for everyone. I loved seeing the characters grow. Leah Mara, though she is more compassionate and quiet and sweet and shy, she really shone in this book, and she really, she exceptionally achieves her goals, and she goes above and beyond, I think, what is expected of her by her people, so that was great. Gray also eventually recognizes where he's supposed to be, and he grows exceptionally as a character too, and I just loved seeing these two characters who at one point were enemies on opposite sides coming together in order to make peace hopefully happen. Hopefully it works out for them. Okay, so that was my overall review of A Heart So Fierce and Broken, as well as my follow-up review of Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I hope you enjoyed this book review today. Unfortunately, I will not be doing another book review this week, as I try to only do one per week unless there's a certain circumstance such as the quarters ended and I'd like to do a video about all the books I've read, something of that nature. But I will be discussing with you next week Invisible Differences. It's a graphic novel about a young woman who is diagnosed with autism in her adulthood, as well as I will most likely be reviewing with you What's Not to Love as well. It's a love story about two teens who are both extremely A-type and they're enemies. So that was fun. They have a rivalry going on, and it was a very fun, lighthearted, intense read, and I definitely gave it 5 stars. Okay, thanks again so much for watching, for viewing with me today, and for just subscribing to my channel. It means so much to me, and I look forward to discussing more books with you in the future. Thanks, and have a wonderful one.